Gamer here. Alright, I couldn't do my computer film with my GoPro. Hope you can see me. Alright, this is day 8 of 11 days of remembrance. Okay, chapter 10 Tips with the Smith crew. Larry was reunited with Doug Smith's crew after flying with the guidance crew for his first mission. Although the Smith crew had been listed for battle orders twice since Larry's first mission, both missions were cancelled due to weather. In the meantime, the crew attended training lectures to keep them in a consistent state of readiness should the fleet need to be launched at a moment's notice. As a break after one partly brutal lecture, the boys decided to visit the hangar where damaged aircraft were stored. At the time, there was 2 Lancasters stored in the salvage area, and upon seeing the rear of the aircraft, Larry knew coming to the hangar had a bad idea. Both aircraft had sustained extensive damage to the rear turrets. One turret was completely missing. The mid-air explosions of most Allied bombers were generally the condition to been caused by a direct hit of flak or by Brent fighters, but in reality some were caused by bombs that had been dropped by other Lancasters flying at higher altitudes. The Lancasters with the missing turret had suffered a direct bomb hit that cleaved the turret off the tail as if it had been cut off by a saw, taking the rear gunner with it. The Lancaster parked beside it had only the lower third of the turret remaining, and as Larry and Alex White were standing in front, a mechanic approached them. "Isn't that something? That's what we call a washout. There wasn't enough left of the gunner to recover, so we just hit the turret with a high-pressure hose. That tells us that the life expectancy right now for gunners is 6 missions." Larry shook his head and thought, "Asshole." December 23rd, 24th, 943. Doug Smith received a battle order and received a crew mission. There would be part of a contingent of 375 Lancasters. The Smith of 8 Mosquitoes and 7 Halifax bombers burned yet another raid on Berlin. He would wake up and hands would grip beside the hood that hit 6-minute attempt of 52 Greer. The landing gear up behind hold himself. He passed through the rest of staring right through darkness. Of the right through the bomber of Doug Smith. The mechanic, terrifying, strode over to the mechanic, terrifying the mechanic. The crews assembled in the locker room to collect their common gear. To the rest of the wardrobe, the gunners wore special cat-pack suits known as tailor suits. They were bright yellow and had their own built-in me vest, the common slang for the inflatable flotation device in use at the time. When everyone was fully dressed and ready to go, the Smith crew was transported by bus to their aircraft. Prior to boarding, the pilot Doug Smith and the flight engineer Harry Priestley did their walkthrough. Each member of the crew silently of the mission about to undertake. Some smoked one last cigarette before boarding. Some said a prayer. Some went through routine checks in their heads and briefness, having a calm, effective. Larry just communicated on concentrated on not throwing up and climbing aboard, ready to get the mission over with. Whatever the outcome, Alex White always got a kick out of watching Harry Presley during the engine startup. He would stand in front of flight engineer's control panel with a smile, recording it as a kid in a candy shop. Each 1,200 horsepower Merlin caught and hurtled up startup like it was some prehistoric dragon emerging from his cave after a ceremony of sleep. They sped black smoke and noxious fumes as a result of oil and gas that had accumulated in the cylinders. As the temperature in the engine rose and exhaust fumes turned from a six-ter black to sweat and clean cobalt blue, Harry's eyes fixed on the gauges in front of him, looking for anomalies in temperatures or pressure. At first glance, the complex array of 22 gauges seemed enduring for the trained eye. However, the gauges were quite significant forward and during in port, starboard by a piston of resin aluminium. Each gauge told Harry vital information about the engines. Each engine had 5 gauges, providing him with information of oil pressure, oil temperature, coolant temperature, fuel pressure, and fuel contrast, balancing the fuel from tank to tank as it was considered during flight, helped with the weight and balance of the aircraft. Too much fuel on one side of the aircraft was proving fatal. Starting on one engine to feed another was also dangerous and unavailable. Carrying on of fuel consumption, meaning the safe gallons and crew of a Lancaster consumed 200 imperial gallons of fuel an hour in normal flight, and it was Harry's Presley job to make sure it did so safely. With the engine spoiled up, and Harry nodded that everything was occupied, Doug applied full power to the 4 Merlins, and soon they were rolling down the runway. After a gentle liftoff and smooth climb out, Larry felt the tension in his shoulders start to slip away. When they had reached 10,000 feet, Larry dropped his right hand down to unlock his turret on its rotating ring. Twisting the hand grips, he raised and lowered the guns and the sight. Then he tested the guns by firing 3 short bursts. The temperature inside the turret was usually between 50 and 60 degrees below Celsius, below zero, as heated air suits kept him comfortable hot, but his nose was freezing. As a remedy, Larry wiped a bit of Vaseline out of the corner of his right eye. He remembered one night on a training mission was he forgot to apply Vaseline to his face. Upon landing, he peeled off his flight helmet and his eyebrow came right off with it. The mistake was awarded him with some strange looks that the next morning, about 3 hours into the flight, the Smith crew made a dawdling northwest, and this passing Litzping, even at 10,000 feet, the fire burning in Berlin was already enough to illuminate the inside of the Lancaster. Doug Smith and the bombardier Ayres Dennis were connecting on the flares being dropped by pathfinders to mark the target. Meanwhile, both Larry and the middle gunner, Alex Wicks, were totally turned on gushing guns at the ready. The illumination from below made it easy to see the night fighters, who were out in full force. Both gunners tracked them in their sights, but the night fighters seemed to be hovering just of the range needed for the could get a clear shot. Just as Larry was beginning to feel that the silence on board was becoming deafening, Alex White's voice boomed over in the check room. "Lancaster on fire, port side." Knowing that wherever there was a Lancaster on fire, there was a night fighter not too far off. Larry snapped his turret to the right in search of a Ju-88 that had just caused the damage. He didn't have to look very hard. The night fighter had obviously used an upward firing cannons to put a hole in the belly of the Lancaster. While he was successful in doing so, he also put himself in danger as it attempted to escape the wounded aircraft, falling straight towards him. In an attempt to avoid the Lancaster, the pilot of the Ju-88 had snapped his control column forward and kicked his right rudder, trying to spiral drive right out of range. The move was a fatal one, that the Ju-88 directly in line with Larry's Browning 303 machine guns. He did have to look hard to find the plane because the Ju-88 fired the entire gun sight. As a second later, Larry hands over the triggers, sending at point blank with the German night fighter. The burst from Larry's gun swept across the German fighter's port engine, cockpit, and starboard engine. The aircraft immediately burst into flames, rolling almost inertly as it treks by. A rear turn followed through. Larry spotted FW-190 coming at him, dead stern. He jerked his triggers while snapping the turn back to the right, rounds bouncing all the fuselage port ring of the FW-190. And desperate over the Lancaster. Seconds later, Larry was scanning the vast night sky for night fighters. He found himself helplessly witnessing a specter from the very depths of hell. A man with his head thrown back, a silent scream escaping his wide open mouth, looked up at Larry terror, examining every feature of his face. The leading edge of the man's parachute drifted past Larry's turn. It was on fire. Larry immediately thought, was this there? But for the glance of God, go I. He later learned that the man supported by the burning parachute was a friend he had trained with, Don Thomas. Where the Smith crew returned to base, they recovered news of the Lancaster that had fallen. All except the rear gunner had bailed out and been taken as prisoners of war. The pilot, William Barrett, had armed the autopilot on the Lancaster as the crew donned their parachutes. It flew for another 170 imperial miles before crashing into the German town of Potsdam. The rear gunner sent the Daves was killed. Dave had flown the mission because the crew originally rear gunner was ill. He was 20 years old. After intelligence completed their assignment of the raid, the credit Larry was 1 Ju-88 kill, 1 F-3190 damage. Normally an action resulted in a fighter shutdown, and normally an action resulting in a fighter shutdown and another classified as damage would be grounds for an automatic award of the DFM or disqualifying medal. Larry never received it. A gunnery officer told Larry he was putting him up for the DFM as a result of his actions against the night fighters, but sadly the gunner officer was killed on the very next trip. 15 Lancasters were lost on the raid, resulting in 104 aircrew casualties and 16 prisoners of war. December 29, 1943, mid-morning on December 29, 1943, Larry received orders that he would be flying as a tail gunner with the crew of P.O. Peter Drain. The raid would be his third on Berlin. They separated raids 3 different crews. It made Larry uneasy. Each crew had their own way of doing things and was worried. He would feeling out of place at 18,000 feet while surrounded by night fighters was dangerous and potentially fatal. The tail gunner that was originally ordered to fly with Drain refused to go on the mission. He was the same tail gunner that couldn't fly with his regular crew. That of